Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about 5 underused Space Marine Legion units you should consider for your army in Horus Heresy, the Age of Darkness. We're going to go through why this might be relevant to you, how you can use these 5 different units, and then we're going to summarize what we've learned and talk about how you can maybe put it into action. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and subscribe. It really does mean a lot. And if there's anything in the video that you'd like to give me feedback on or anything you'd like to comment on, please drop a comment in YouTube below. And now, on with the show. Firstly, let's talk about why the content in this video might be relevant to you. So, as with my How Not to Be Competitive video, which you might have already seen, I think a great thing to do when making an army for Horus Heresy to keep your army from being too powerful, or maybe to add variation to it, is to replace some powerful units with other units that fill the same role. So maybe some units that fill the role slightly less efficiently, or maybe just some units that fill the role in a slightly different way. This can add variety to your army. It can mean that you're not using multiple of the same unit or the same type of unit, and it can give you some different painting opportunities, some different modelling opportunities, and just mix it up a little bit when you're putting your army together to keep it fun and interesting and fresh. It can also make your army building a bit more flexible, depending on what alternative units you decide to use, and ultimately can make your army a bit more fun to play on the tabletop for both you and your opponent. The first unit we're going to look at is the Skyhunter Squadron. So these are currently not very well regarded because bikes got a little bit easy to kill in this edition. You know, they've got 2 wounds but only toughness 4 and a normal save. But they are a good way to get some big guns into your army in a fast attack slot. Now, the heavy support slot is usually very full with all the different cool options you've got in there. But if you want more guns in your army, then getting your guns in a fast attack slot can be super effective. Now, these are 105 points for 6 wounds of bikes versus 100 points for 5 wounds in a heavy support squad, which is generally a good baseline for, ways of getting heavy weapons in your army. So really, they're not that bad. They're a bit more vulnerable to instant death weapons, sure, but they're not actually super expensive for their survivability. They can bring 3 heavy weapons, although they're a bit more limited in what they can bring. They can bring Volkite Culverins, Plasma Cannons, or Multi-Melters, versus 5 in your normal heavy support squad. But really, again, they're still doing it at a reasonable cost. They're very mobile is obviously the big difference, so that can actually make them more survivable compared to a static unit. With most legions who are on Death Guard, once you've put your heavy support squad on the table, it's probably staying where it is for most of the game, whereas a Skyhunter Squadron can potentially set up behind cover where it's maybe safe from shooting on turn 1 and then pop out on your first turn and shoot something, so it can actually be more survivable in some ways than the heavy support squad can be. But then they also do have some other advantages over the heavy support squad as well, so they can deny objectives in a pinch. They're a denial unit, they're very fast, so if you need to just stop someone scoring something, these guys can go and do that. They can get into range with the shorter range weapons as well, so they can use multi-melters, which are a bit expensive on these, but, very, very powerful weapons. But also plasma cannons are really good at killing Marines, but 36-inch range on a heavy support squad can be a little bit limiting sometimes, where these guys have got no problem getting into range at all. And also they've got the option to deep strike, so you might not use this a lot depending on how much interceptor your opponent's got, but sometimes your opponent might not have so much interceptor, so you can deep strike these as well. So really they're bringing similar for your points to what you could get in a heavy support squad, but they're doing something very different on the table, which can make it a bit more fun to play, give you some slightly different ways to shoot your opponent, really. And lastly, I think they look very 30k, at least to me. These look very different from anything that exists in 40k, and they add a bit of visual variety to your army as well, which is really cool. And in a similar vein, we've also got the Proteus Land Speeder Squadron. So similarly to the Skyhunters, it's another good way to get some big guns to your army in a fast attack slot. They really are the ultimate 80s kitsch unit from Forge World, and I really didn't like these to start with, but they've grown on me a little bit because actually they look a little bit classic and kind of funky. Or you can also use the Plastic Games Workshop option as well. The plastic land speeders were around in the Heresy, and if you want to save money or you prefer that look, these are a nice, cheap and easy thing to get access to. Once more, they're very mobile, so that can help you be more survivable compared to a static gunnery unit. They can get in range with shorter range weapons and deep strike when it makes sense to do so. But additionally, the Proteus Landspeeder gives you the option of grav guns. So you can bring 2 grav guns on these guys, and everybody knows how good Haywire is. But also just shooting a couple of grav guns at infantry units on the ground can really mess with their plans in terms of movement. It can mean that they lose some guys when they move from the dangerous terrain. It's a really good weapon, and particularly because grav guns are so short-ranged, being on a fast, relentless platform is a really good way to use them. I also really like the heavy flamer option for cheap. It's only 65 points for 2 heavy flamers. Now, I rarely do rate flamers in this game. I think they're very good, especially with so much infantry around. And it's really good for a Proteus Landspeeder to be able to go so fast and put those heavy flamers where you need them. But also, because it's so cheap, these Landspeeders can go in melee weak targets. So let's say your enemy's got a really big unit of las cannons at the back of the battlefield, and let's say you've managed to draw out their Overwatch option somewhere else on the battlefield. You can charge into combat with that las cannon unit with your Landspeeder. And even if that unit manages to kill your Landspeeder in melee in 1 turn, which is not easy because it's toughness 5, they've only got 10 attack, strength 4, no AP, you can stop that las cannon unit firing for an entire turn with a 65-point Landspeeder. Really good, interesting alternative way to deal with enemy big guns rather than just shooting them. It's really good. And when they do get shot themselves under normal circumstances, they've got Talons of the Legion. No, Harbingers of the Legion. You might not want to waste a reaction on a single Landspeeder, but maybe you've got a squadron. And 5+ rerollable Shrouded does actually make them quite survivable. So if your opponent does decide to turn some guns on them, you've got a really great defensive option there as well. So maybe not the cheapest thing in the world from a purely, min-maxing standpoint, but a unit that really adds a lot to your army. And again, if you're playing something that's more of a static gun line or doesn't have any of these zippy Landspeeder type units in it, adds a bit of variety to your army, gives you something different to play, gives your opponent something different to play against, and still brings you something that's going to be viable on the battlefield as well. Now, another thing I really love, and is not super uncommon, but is not generally considered to be as good as I think it is the Vindicator. And there's obviously 2 different ways to arm this. There's the Demolisher Cannon and the Laser Destroyer. So the Demolisher Cannon is really cheap at 120 points, or the second squadron member is only 105. So that's 2 of these for 225 points. That's the price of 1 las cannon Dreadnought. The cannon's really good versus Marines. It's got a much smaller blast. It's only a normal blast. But anything it hits is probably going to die because it's got that AP3, it's got Brutal 3, it's also got Rendon. And this is particularly good against one of the big boogeymen of this edition, the Stone Gauntlet Phalanx Warders. Making them take that rerollable invulnerable save 3 times when you hit them still means they're almost certainly going to die. And if you can even kill sort of 2 or 3 of them with 1 shot from this, that's a fair amount of points from a unit, and it's a unit that's hard to kill otherwise. So even though the blast is small, the effectiveness of this gun is very high. And though it might not look it, when you look at shooting 2+ save targets with it, because it's got AP3, it's actually way better than it looks at killing 2+ save targets as well. So to prove that, I've done the maths for you. Now you've got 2 ways in which you can kill a 2+ save target, and to make it a little bit harder, I've made it a Cataphractite Terminator for the purposes of this slide, so it's also got a 4+ invulnerable save. You've got a 42.5% chance of killing a Terminator in Cataphractite armor that you hit. Now that's really good. So the way you do that is you're either going to rend it, and then it's going to have to take 3 invulnerables to not get instant death, or you're not going to rend it and it's going to have to pass 3 2+ saves, and there's a good chance of failing just 1 of them, and you only have to fail 1 and you get instant death. So you're very much able to kill tough targets with this. And again, if you hit 3 Terminators with this, you've got you're almost certainly going to kill 1. You've got a good chance of killing 2 or 3, and if they're grouped up, you can kill more. And for a unit that's 120 points, that might not sound like a lot, but it's actually very effective at killing lots of these targets. So slightly different targets it's good at than most weapons, but a very effective unit. It's also really good at penetrating vehicles as well. So thanks to Strength 12, Ordnance and Sunder. Now I think that means you get to roll twice and re-roll twice as well. But even if you disagree and you think you just get the Sunder, it's still super reliable. It's going to penetrate even armor value 15 most of the time. It is only AP3, so it's not going to be able to explode vehicles, but you're reliably going to pen even big targets. It's also got good potential versus Dreadnoughts. Now, it's only going to hit them once, and most of the time it's got a 42.5% chance, a little bit higher because the Dreadnought's got a slightly lower invulnerable save of getting one wound through. So that's not the best use of a 120-point model, but given how tough Dreadnoughts are, and the potential to get 3 through with Brutal in theory, if you rend the Dreadnought, it's at least got some play versus a Dreadnought, even if not the best. Other good things about this is it's cheap as you can use the plastic Mars pattern Vindicator from Games Workshop. I actually think that looks better than the Forge World version, for the Demolisher Cannon at least. And, the model just generally, most people agree, looks cool. So a really interesting option that not a lot of people use very often. Onto the Laser Destroyer option as well. So it's effectively 3 twin-linked las cannons in terms of profile, which is effectively the same as 4 non-linked las cannons. And for 140 or 125, if you're taking a 2-model unit, that's pretty good firepower. A Dreadnought with 4 of them is 225 points, although a bit more accurate. Or a unit of 5 heavy support Marines with 5 las cannons is 150 points. So these are actually quite a bargain for the firepower that they bring. It's also cheaper and tougher than an equivalent Predator for similar firepower as well, which is also good. So ultimately, it's an effective way to get a lot of lasers into your army. I think lots of people are trying to put las cannons in their army for anti-tank stuff, which is a really good idea. And this is just another way to do that without resorting to using yet another heavy weapon squad, or maybe a Predator, which will be a lot more common. And again, looks cool. I do love the Forge World model for this. Not that there's an alternative, but it does look very cool as well. Next, we've got the Seeker Squad. They're in sort of a similar niche to Sniper Reconnaissance Squads in that they can pick out individual important models in a unit. Basically, they've got more reliable guns. They've got Ballistic Skill 5, they've got Breach on a 4 as opposed to Rend and 5, but they've got a shorter range. So they're more of an offensive unit than the Recon Squad instead of being defensive. Obviously, they're not line either, but they are quite a bit cheaper for what they bring. So you can get 7 of these guys for the same price as 5 Recon Marines with Nemesis Bolters. So they really do have much better output. And one of the downsides of those Recon Squads with Nemesis Bolters is they can be a little bit inconsistent. They only average, with 6 of them, they only average 1 rending sniper shot. So a lot of the time you're only getting to kill 1 guy of your choice, and just a slightly low roll means they kill nothing. And that's happened to me quite a lot running Recon Squads. So Seekers will do the same thing, put themselves in more danger, but at least do it more reliably. You can also in some ways compare them to Plasma Marines in terms of role as well. They're breaching, they're good at, shooting enemy Marines, whereas Plasma, are quite good at Dreadnoughts and other things as well. These are just focused on the Marines though, because they breach, they don't rend, but they are able to put out plenty of shots at range 24 that can breach and kill a good amount of enemy Marines with a nice reliable Ballistic Skill 5. They're also not bad at killing Terminators either, for the same reason. Certainly for their points cost, you can put wounds through that 2+ armor save. It's quite an important thing to do. Generally, they're just good at killing troops. That's what they focus on. Having a way to reach out and touch key enemy models can be very strong. Not like you need lots of these in your army to do it, but one Seeker Squad that's able to go and shoot that key enemy heavy support squad. Maybe you're going to take out, the Nuncio Vox, or you're going to take out the Sergeant in advance of someone else pinning it, or whatever else it is. Generally, it's just very good. Apothecaries are the obvious other one. They can also take a Precision Disintegrator, which is quite unique and a little bit unusual. And that can be quite good at killing tougher models. So like the Sergeant in a command squad of Terminators, for example, who you'll generally find tooled up with a Thunderhammer, quite an expensive model. You can just disintegrate them with a precision shot out of the unit from that combi disintegrator. Is quite a powerful thing, again, to have access to. So this squad is good at shooting Marines in a way similar to other Marines that are good at shooting Marines are, but they do it slightly differently and are definitely a worthy and cheaper alternative to things like Plasma or Recon Squads. And the last unit we're going to talk about, number 5, is the Veteran Squad. So a lot of Legions do have access to things that are just flat better and maybe a bit cooler than the veteran squad. Lots of the melee focus legions in particular have got a weapon skill 5 unit with some better rules. Maybe it comes with power weapons, so it even makes it cheaper. But a lot of legions actually don't have access to that, and mostly the more shooting inclined legions have only got veteran squads that could fulfill that role. So for those legions in particular, getting some unique looking Marines into your army that you can put a bit of extra effort in, because you got to paint less of them. You know, there's only 5 with 2 wounds each as opposed to 10, and you're probably only going to have 1 squad in your army. That's quite a cool thing to be able to do, is to make yourself a unique veteran squad. And they're not actually that expensive for what they do in reality, because you're probably going to give these guys power weapons, which makes them 140 points for 5 guys with power weapons, with 2 wounds each. Sure, your opponent can instant death them, but are they really going to waste strength 8 weapons on submarines with melee weapons? You know, maybe not. They're not actually that expensive for what they do, really. The tough thing is actually getting them to be usable. Getting access to some weapon skill 5 stuff can be really good. Weapon skill is so important in melee combat, and weapon skill 4 units really struggle to be effective versus weapon skill 5 units, no matter what they're equipped with. And these guys have got weapon skill 5. Don't make them too expensive though, because you don't want to make them a juicy target because they're not that hard to kill. Power weapons on them is the best thing to do. So lightning claws are also good. Maybe 1 or 2 guys in the squad with 2 lightning claws could be a thing. But I really like things like power swords, power maces in these units, just to keep them, you know, nice and cheap. Maybe a graviton gun or a plasma gun. You know, more gravs are always good, and they're relentless, so they can use it when they're charging. And definitely take the artificer armor, because again, you know, the unit is quite expensive. It's a worthwhile upgrade. Because these guys don't have transport options that let them assault, they can use a termite, which is really cool, but that's not an assault vehicle. They can be potentially good as like a countercharge unit. So if you are playing a shooty army and you want a unit that can help you when the opponent comes to charge, you could use terminators or a command squad in that role, but you might want something cheaper, or you might want a second unit, and these are kind of good for that. They can hang around, and when your opponent comes in to assault you, they really can bring a lot of pain. You can fight enemy terminators with them. The only difficulty in doing that is if you need to bring AP2 weapons, which means you're going to strike last, and the opponent will then often have weapons that will go first, and they can kill a lot of your guys before they go. But, you know, anything else coming in, you know, these enemy elite units that are sort of equivalent, these guys will fight them. You know, other guys in power armor, these have got power weapons, they'll have a good fight against some other units, and, you know, the power level isn't that big that these guys can't win those fights either. So I would definitely consider, for the various reasons, using them on the table, as well as being able to convert yourself up some cool veterans, using a squad of these in your army if you feel you need a little bit of melee. So to summarise, there are some great alternatives in the book to common units, and yes, they may be slightly less efficient, or maybe slightly less good, or maybe slightly harder to use, but they are worth looking at, especially if you're trying to tone down the power level of your army or make it a bit more interesting to play. They enable you to make your army a bit more unique, maybe use units that your opponent isn't using, as opposed to ending up in a sort of mirror where everyone's using similar sets of units. And they give you some opportunities to build, convert, and paint something a bit different to the other models in your army. Even if they are a little bit worse, they do often do other things well to compensate as well. So whilst the Sky Hunter Squadron might not be as good at raw shooting as a heavy support squad is, they're really fast and they can go and deny objectives and that kind of stuff as well. So those things are worth considering. Ultimately, you can change up the playstyle of your army, and you can add some extra dimensions or some self-imposed challenges on yourself to try to get the most out of some slightly different units, and that can really make the game more fun for you and your opponent. And that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been interesting. I hope there's some stuff there that you can take away and use in your own games. If you've enjoyed the content, please do leave me a like and a subscribe. And if there's anything you'd like to comment on or any feedback, please leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.